Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Generous Futures, Advancing Disability Rights. My name is Esther Inani, and I am the director of the School of Disability Studies at our university. We're very excited about our panel today, and we can't wait to dive in. Please note, live captioning and ASL interpretation is part of this webinar today. So I'm going to start I'm going to start today with a land acknowledgement. So I'm speaking to you today from the city that is currently known as Toronto. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and to protect the land. Land acknowledgements are an opportunity for all of us to pause and reflect. I encourage those of you, especially those of you who are not in Toronto, to think about the Indigenous history and presence in the land that you call home. While those of us who are not Indigenous, such as myself, have come here in have arrived here as settlers in many different ways, I want to acknowledge that some of our ancestors and elders have come here through force or involuntarily, particularly those who have been brought here by force as part of the transatlantic slave trade. We acknowledge that we are all treaty people, and we are grateful to be working and living on this land. So I'm delighted to be moderating this panel for you today. Before we begin, I want to let the audience know that I am a disabled person, I am legally blind, and I will be potentially asking for some support from those behind the scenes. So just as a bit of a forewarning. So before we begin our discussion, I'd like to thank our lead sponsor, TD Bank Group, for their generous support in sponsoring the series discussions. TD Bank Group has been a great supporter of our university, and we are delighted that they have joined us on this journey of understanding. So today we're going to focus on the role that philanthropy plays in supporting and advancing disability rights. So disability touches us all. People with disabilities constitute 22% of the Canadian population. And we are your family members, we are parents, we are the children, we are your neighbors, community members, we are your classmates and your co-workers. So the conditions of our lives impact all of you, all of us together, everyone we're in relationship with. But despite of our numbers and impact, people with disabilities continue to face constraints, constrained access to social goods, including work, education, community life, leisure, culture, healthcare, and through the passage of recent legislation, even access to life itself. It's important to recognize, though, that these constraints are not felt evenly amongst disabled people, but are inflected by our own social position afforded to us through class, through race, through immigration status, gender, and indigeneity. And that for some disabled people, particularly disabled people with complex care needs and those labeled with developmental disabilities, these constraints are felt particularly acutely and can lead to isolation and institutionalization. Now, against this, disabled leaders for rights and justice have led the way to secure legal and policy changes that would begin to dismantle the barriers barriers in our environment that contribute to these constraints. They have fought for greater access, not only for disabled people, but for others pushed to the social margins. Disability rights and justice work offers radical hope. So it's not just a fight for inclusion, but it's also a struggle to start to bring disability into the center of how we understand the world and see disability as an opportunity to reimagine our worlds and to work towards social transformation. So today we're going to face questions that flow from this understanding of disability. So how can we create a more accessible Canada? What are some of the socially made barriers that disabled people face and that harm us? How do the efforts of fundraising and philanthropy help disabled people, and how might they perpetuate inequities among us? How do the decisions around funding center disabled people, or how do they exclude us or leave us at the margins? So today I'm going to pose some questions to the panel. And so today I'm going to pose a series of questions to the panel, and following these questions, if time permits, I'm going to draw upon some questions that you submitted as audience members when you registered. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our panel members. So, Fran Odette is a feminist educator, longtime disability activist, and the director of the P&L Charitable Foundation. Her research is at the intersection between gender, disability, and sexualities. Fran has worked in services supporting individuals with, Fran has worked in services supporting individuals experiencing gender-based violence, and in particular with women and children with disabilities, focusing particularly on women and children with disabilities. Fran has also worked around issues related to disability and sex positivity, working in particular with sexual health promoters and disabled people themselves. So, as an educator, Fran's work has been really to help service providers draw the linkages to be able to support people with disabilities, to ensure that they have practices that can be inclusive of disabled people and inclusive of their gender identities and their sexualities. Welcome, Fran. Taylor Lindsay Noel is the founder and the CEO of Cup of Tea. In 2008, she had a gymnastics accident, and that left her paralyzed from the neck down. She is an alumni of this university, having earned her BA in radio and television arts. Taylor is currently balancing being a motivational speaker, a disability advocate, a council member of the Premier's Council of Equality and Opportunity, and her role as CEO of Cup of Tea, which is luxury loose leaf teas, which has recently been featured on Oprah's favorite things list. Recently, Taylor was named Young Entrepreneur of the Year by the Black Professionals Association Harry Jerome Award, Canada's most prestigious awards program uh, distinguishing Black excellence. Welcome, Taylor. Vim Kochar is the founder, chair, and CEO of the Canadian Foundation for Physically Disabled Persons and is a former Canadian senator. In his role at CFPDP, Vim continues his lifelong work of removing barriers, empowering, and helping raise awareness of the capacity of people with disabilities and working towards equality. In the last 35 years, Vim has raised over $35 million to assist those living with disabilities, while working tirelessly to create a public awareness about the conditions of disabled people's lives and their capabilities. He was recently recognized for this work with an award from the Association of Fundraising Professionals. In addition, Vim has been the recipient of numerous other awards, including the Order of Ontario, the Ontario Medal for Good Citizenship, among others. Welcome, Vim. So welcome to everyone. What an amazing panel. So I'd like to start today's conversation by asking each of our panel members the same question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Fran, and then we'll move to Taylor, and then with Vim. So Fran, I'd like to ask you about your earliest memory of generosity. What is that memory, and how do you think that influences your perspective on the topic today?
Thanks so much, Esther. I have lots of memories around generosity. My father, particularly, was very much interested in the arts, with a focus on visual arts. And so those are my memories of generosity, kind of in really broad examples. But when I think about generosity in terms of this topic today around disability, my earliest memory had to do when I was an adolescent. And it was when my family made a donation to create an accessible indoor playground for children who were attending a school that was specifically for children with disabilities. When I learned that my family had contributed to the school, it really was the first time that I got to experience my family's interest and commitment to the contribution and the creation of a young child or youth experience of what it could be like to have an inclusive and accessible playground, and one that would allow children with disabilities to really experience play. The space was filled with green, lush plants, a waterfall, and a human-made, wheelchair-accessible treehouse. It was kind of awesome, I have to say, and a really unique space for young people that were going to that school. I had already graduated, so I got to actually come back and hang out in that space when I was younger. I got to kind of saddle up to what it would be like to be a young child, being at a height of a sandbox that I could, play in my wheelchair. I got to hang out in the, cave where I could, imagine what it would be like to play hide and seek with my peers. And I also got to experience what it was like to go up a sloping incline around this, sort of human-made maple tree, and to be able to look out. And if that had been actually outside, I would be able to have a view that I would never have imagined just from the ground. So later, I ended up going back to that school for what we call alumni events. And, you know, it was kind of cool to go to that space if we wanted to hang out with someone special, away from the surveillance of adults who were there to quote unquote chaperone us. It was a chance, I'm sure, that many parents never imagined in the creation of this space, where young adults and maybe young teens could sneak away with their crush and steal a kiss or two. That's my memory of generosity.
And how does that influence your perspective on the topic today, Fran?
Oh gosh, that's a whole other topic, Esther. But I think that it really speaks to the fact that it is possible to experience inclusion. I think in that time, you know, there were lots of bumps along the way, but I feel like we're getting closer. And so I think that definitely influenced my desire for access and inclusion in the lives of young people, as well as, you know, following in the steps of those who came before me.
Great. One wonderful memory. Thanks for sharing it. Taylor, let's turn to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me on this discussion today. One of my earliest memories of generosity happened actually shortly after my accident. So I suffered a very severe accident after falling off the high bar when I was 14 years old. So a lot of my memories before 14, I don't particularly have, but in that essence, after my accident, being a member of the Canadian national team, I had a very high expectation of being supported from Gymnastics Ontario as well as Canada, but unfortunately that wasn't my reality. But shortly following my accident, I received an overwhelming amount of support from strangers and people who I didn't know, people who would flood Sick Kids Hospital just to be able to send a well wishes to my mom during a very difficult time. People who didn't know me who donated money so that I would be able to have a home after physical rehab to be able to come home to. And people who set up rallies, walkathons, and really gathered around someone they didn't know just for the sake of being a good human and supporting someone. And those experiences was my first insight into the generosity of people and strangers, and truly shaped me to be the woman I am today and continue to give back in the many facets that I'm very grateful to be able to now.
Thanks a lot, Taylor. Thanks for that. And Vim, your thoughts?
You're just on mute right now, Vim.
Thank you. There you are.
Okay. You don't have to be rich to be generous. Even a homeless person can be a generous person. My earliest memory of generosity is when I came to United States to go to school at the age of 17, about 65 or 66 years ago. I came with $300 in my pocket, and when I reached Austin, Texas, I realized I don't have any more money, and it was suggested that if I want a summer job, I should go to California, Juba City, to pick peaches. And that's what I did. And I met an old man there who taught me how to pick peaches. But the trick was hard work and long hours. I worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, picked 150 baskets of 40 pounds, and I made $21 a day. This old man told me that if you eat a peach, it is going to cost you 15 cents because time it takes to eat a peach, you can pick a whole basket, which is worth about 15 cents. When I was leaving after 2 months, this fellow gave me an envelope with $1,000 cash in it. And I think I would call him a homeless guy, but he had the money to give me to go back to school. I was very hesitant to accept the money, but I took it anyway and came back to Austin and found a full-time job and going to school full-time. I realized I should not have taken that $1,000 from him. So I decided to return the money to Joe, and he wrote back that he was very disappointed that I did not need the money. I could not find another student to help. He said he did not give me the money. He gave it to a very needy student. And I have never forgotten that gesture of the old man. And he taught me a big lesson that you really don't have to be rich to be generous. Like Mother Teresa used to say, you haven't given till it hurts. So sharing what you got is what it takes to be a generous person.
Thank you, Vim. That's a terrific story. So thank you, everyone, for starting our discussion off. Fran, I want to turn back to you. In 2019, the P&L Odette Foundation made a generous gift of $500,000 to establish the Tanis Doe Postdoctoral Fellowship in Gender, Disability, and Social Justice. And it made this gift to the university to explore the intersection between disability and gender. Wondered if you could talk a little bit about why you decided to spearhead this initiative and what difference you think this has made to the community.
Thank you, Esther. I think first and foremost, the reason why I chose to spearhead this opportunity is I'm a firm believer in recognizing the ways in which early disability leadership made a difference for those of us who came before and who benefited from the efforts of the work of many of these leaders who engaged in tireless hours to bring to the forefront the ideas of equity and equality for disabled people. Dr. Tanis Doe was a disability scholar, an activist who had a significant influence on my own learning and thinking critically about the issues around intersecting identities related to disability and gender and sexuality and race, as well as somebody who was doing groundbreaking work around looking at issues of violence in the lives of people with disabilities. And that was really important for me to also, think about creating this fellowship because it is Dr. Doe's work that made a difference in my own life as somebody who was moving through an abusive relationship and was trying to make sense of it all. And so I feel that because of the work of Tanis Doe and other scholars, it led me to actually do work in the anti-violence sector after I finished my master's. The other reason why this fellowship came to realization is because of the opportunities that I was afforded to learn more about disability scholarship through my connection with the professors and students who are part of the School of Disability Studies. Having the opportunity to teach part-time in the school, to be part of a rich and vibrant community of scholars and community activists gave me breath and hope that we could have a different world that wasn't just about accommodation, but was really thinking about what real inclusion needs to look like in order for us to have a just world. This fellowship was also to say thank you to the young scholars who paved the way for me to learn about the collective history that I am part of. The list is quite extensive, but I want to say that this gift is my acknowledgement of the ways in which I grew as an activist and scholar in the area of disability studies, and how it was mentored and nurtured by professors such as you, Esther, Melanie Panich, Dr. Catherine Church, and so many others that I met in my time at the School of Disability Studies.
Thank you, Fran. Those are very kind words. And I would say that the inaugural Tanis Joe Scholar, postdoctoral scholar, is coming into his last few months in the fellowship, which is really bittersweet. But he has made a tremendous difference to our school. He's been an amazing citizen, so thank you. I'm going to turn now to Taylor. So Taylor, I was wondering if you could share your story of how you came to want to give back to the community. And I'm wondering if you could talk in particular about how your company came to support charities like the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. Why was that important to you?
Thank you. The journey to wanting to support a variety of communities, including the disability community and the mental health community, came from stemming off what I was saying before, the generosity I saw at a very young age. I was surrounded by so much love and support during some of the darkest times I've ever had. So when I started Cup of Tea, luxury loose leaf teas, I knew that there had to be some form of charitable component to it. It was something that was extremely important to me, even when I didn't know the direction of the business and how I really wanted it to look and feel. I knew that giving back would be absolutely imperative, and something I could not start my business without. In really narrowing down which causes I wanted to support, I knew that I wanted to start with one that really affected and touched a lot of people. A lot of my family and friends had assumed the very first charity that I would support would be something that surrounds spinal cord injury, because that's something that affects me in my everyday life. But in really taking the time to consider the options that I had, I realized in reflecting on my journey that the biggest journey and struggle that I had was actually the mental health side of my accident, and not, in fact, the physical. The physical is extremely difficult, don't get me wrong, and the one that people assume. However, the mental journey and coming to terms with that was the hardest part for me. And in knowing that mental health struggles affects 1 in 4 people, I just felt like it was the right thing. So currently my company does give back to CAMH, and it's something that we are really proud of, and we do plan on expanding and growing our business to be able to touch more lives. But the amazing outpour of response from our customers in supporting mental health struggles was something that I didn't necessarily expect, but something that really has made our business what it is, and has made me as an owner and founder very proud of the work that we do.
Okay, thank you. I like how you're talking about how disability experience is far more complex than it can appear on the surface as well. Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to Vim now. So Vim, you're very well known for being a champion of Canadians with disabilities for many years. So as founder and chair of the Canadian Foundation for Physically Disabled Persons, can you tell us about what the foundation is doing to advance disability rights and why that work is important to you.
Thank you, Esther. To be able to tell why I do what I do at the Canadian Foundation for Disabled Persons is to understand how it came into existence. About 39 years ago, somebody from the Crippled Children's Center, you can imagine there used to be something called Crippled Children's Center in Toronto. They requested for $10,000 to build a home for people with disabilities. And we decided to organize a Great Valentine Gala, which was held in 1985 on the Valentine Day. And our idea was to raise $10,000. And that was a one-time event, and it was going to end after that. But instead, end of the day, we ended up raising over $239,000. And this young lady came back to me and said, why don't we do it one time again? And we did it next year, and we raised $300,000. And then I said to myself, why don't we do it one time again? And we got Bob Hope, engaged him to come and be our entertainer, and we raised over $1 million. That was back in 1988, when $1 million was a lot of money. So we got addicted to it. And immediately we formed the foundation to manage all the money that was rolling in. And we had to define our mission, and our mission was to make Canada the best country in the world for people with disabilities. And for last 38 years, almost 4 decades, that's what we have been doing. It doesn't happen as simply as I'm putting it here. It's a lot of hard work. You have to take one project at a time, make it a success, make it a self-sustaining, and then move forward. We decided to build a home for deafblind community in Canada. There was no such thing as having a home where deafblind people could live independently and barrier-free. Most of the deafblind people lived in institutions, hidden up, or lived at home. But when we built over 30 years ago, the Rotary Cheshire Home on Willowdale Avenue, even after 30 years, that is the only home in the world where people can live independently in their own apartments and do all the work. Now, we have to look after 16 deafblind people and about 35 other people who come for training at the Rotary Cheshire Home and Canadian Helen Keller Center. We have a budget now of $3.5 million a year, and it is sustaining itself. Then you try to move out to the Paralympic athletes, and we made them from 1% or less than 1% recognition to 80% recognition in Canada. One in 1985, Dr. Bob Jackson asked me to take the torch of Paralympic athletes. Paralympic athletes were really not called Paralympian because nobody knew what Paralympians are. But over the last 38 years, we held a Why Not Marathon from coast to coast with 13,000 disabled people carrying the torch, visiting 800 communities. The rating from 1% shot up to something like 35%. Now, we have been doing that. We have gotten the permanent funding from the government of Canada for the Paralympic athletes, and everything is moving forward real good. Do I still have time, or I'm running out of my time?
And you could say maybe one or two more things. Sure, this is.
The third thing we did was when we appointed Brian Mulroney into the Disability Hall of Fame, he said everything we were doing was wrong. We should start on the top. If we can put people on the board of directors, they will make all the changes. It will have a ripple effect that we have never seen it before. So 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we started a seat at a table program challenging corporate Canada to appoint people with disability on major corporate boards. We assembled a group of 13 very, very prominent CEOs in Canada, and they are guiding how to select people and recommend them to board. We have had over 25 full-page ads in Globe and Mail. We have written 500 letters to the different corporations. We have got 150 applications from qualified Canadians who are disabled, and we are promoting them. And I'm pleased to report that from almost zero that we knew, now we have 8 disabled people on corporate board, and things are moving very fast. But still, for 22% of population to have only 7 or 8 people on the board is 0.3% population out of 22% population, which is the people with disabilities in Canada. But we are going to take it before the end of this year to maybe 1%, which will be a big achievement. There are so many stories I can tell, but I will leave it at these 2.
Thank you. There'll be more time to share more stories, but this really interesting account of how to create infrastructure changes to secure support for disabled people, and actually looking to representation from disabled people right at the decision-making table, as you say. So thank you. I think that sets us up really well, Fran, for a question I'd like to ask you. I'm wondering what your take is on funding trends related to disability rights and justice. Do you think it's time now to shore up resources? And how do you think we should be going about this?
That's a great question, Esther. Thank you. I'm not a fundraiser. I can't imagine doing that work. It's incredibly difficult, and not difficult. I think we're in a climate when it might be more difficult for a variety of reasons. But I do think what I'm noticing is that there seems to be this shift around sort of the traditional dominant narrative around disability and how charity can support people with disabilities. And I think what I'm hoping for in conversations that happen after today is that we really start thinking about whose voices have not typically or traditionally been at the table. And so, a long time person, part of the movement, most of the people that I know in those earlier days were, predominantly white people. And so I think the time has come now where actually we have to start centering the voices of Black, Indigenous, people of color, newcomer, immigrant communities, of folks with disabilities, queer and trans folks with disabilities who have not been part of the earlier conversations around who gets to benefit from disability rights. And I think we also want to be thinking about the fact that disability is something that if we actually grow old, we will be fortunate enough to actually experience it. So it's kind of like a twist or a little bit of a flipping the narrative around disability being something that is tragic or something that we must pity, especially those people who are not part of our experience. Because how can I imagine ever living a life like you? I think that we want to really challenge the narrative that does accurately reflect our lives and speaks about interdependence rather than this push around independence as being the only way of being valued in this culture, and to see inclusion and access as being critical not only for people with disabilities but for all of us, and that disability can be something positive and really does inform how many people come to see their lives and to see what's possible for a more sort of just world. Um, yeah, I think that, there's lots of things that I think what's happening outside of organizations around fundraising, around challenging the narrative, also needs to happen within the organizations. And Vim, you're talking about people who are on the boards, which is like very important. And I also want to push that one step further to say you actually need people in paid positions doing this work who have a commitment to challenging the narrative about disabled people and the potential of our lives. So I'm going to kind of leave it at that point, and then I might have some more to add.
Okay, thanks, Fran. That's really moving the conversation from disability rights to disability justice and foregrounding justice, not just for disabled people, but for all people. And so much to think about in what you're saying, and maybe that will get picked up as we carry on. I want to be sure to be able to turn to Taylor. Taylor, I guess it's picking up on this this understanding of thinking about carefully about who's representing disabled people. So thinking about your perspective as a young activist and a young entrepreneur, why do you think, why do you want to engage youth in your initiatives? And why do you think it's particularly important to engage youth in initiatives that advance disability rights and justice?
I think it stems a little bit off of what Fran was saying. Disability does not have one, it doesn't fit comfortably under one blanket. And I think that through my experiences, I'm Black, I'm female, I'm disabled. I have lived my life as an able-bodied person and someone with a disability. So I feel like I've seen a lot in 28 years of life, but engaging with youth, we have a perspective that will help to shape our future. A lot of the things that get pushed out through government or in society in general will affect us eventually. So I do believe that we should have a say and a seat at the table. And that's why I've tried to engage in as many ways as I can, not only through being an entrepreneur, but being a part of the Accessibility Council, being a part of different I'm on the spinal cord injury board, because eventually these things, these laws and these changes will affect everyone. I think a lot of youth, I know that I was very humbled at the age of 14, having a disability, and you don't necessarily think about what your life could look like when you feel invincible. As a gymnast, I felt invincible. I was not cocky, I was not full of myself, but I could have never imagined this happening to me. And the reality of life is that at some point, disability will affect you. When you are 90 years old, you will not be moving around and trucking around as you once did when you're younger. And so just being a little bit more proactive in what the totality of your life will look like, and making sure that we have the infrastructure, the resources, and the support in place now for the future is so important. So through my work and through being a young entrepreneur, I try as often as I can to open the perspective and eyes of other people, especially the youth.
Do you think there are particular ways to engage young people in this work?
Absolutely. I think being open to giving us a seat, like I said before, at the table. I was very, very fortunate to have been reached out to be a part of the Accessibility Council by, being a more public and vocal person in terms of social media. But I think being able to open that door for me has allowed me to be able to open that door for other people. And so being open to the idea that younger folks do have thoughts and opinions that are valid is really important, so that we continue to expand the diversity of councils, of people and lawmakers who really have their foot in the door to these changes that are needing to happen. So just being open-minded to the fact that young people do have opinions and thoughts that could genuinely help and contribute to the overall cause.
Okay, great. Thanks, Taylor. Fim, you've been a generous supporter of students with disabilities at our university. We have a campaign right now, and students are applying for awards with the CFPDP. And you have had you've referenced this, a special charity run to establish a series of bursaries directed at students with disabilities. So what are some of the challenges that you've encountered with fundraising? And maybe that might be balanced off if there's time with some of the surprises, the happy surprises that you've had along the way.
Well, to me, there are three main barriers for all students. Number one is the physical barrier, which I think most universities are realizing that you got to have accessibility and build the university, at least the new construction has to be barrier-free for all people with disabilities, and I think it is doing a good job. Second barrier is the financial barrier. People with disabilities who are going to universities normally have financial barriers, and education is one of the most important factors to be successful in life. So what we are trying to do is establish endowment funds at every university in Canada, every major university. Let us say right now we have bursaries at Ryerson, we have bursaries at York University, we have bursaries at Winnipeg, we have bursaries at Pearson College, and we have got promise of matching funds for 100,000 from University of Toronto, matching fund from Queen University. We have promise of matching fund from Carleton University. And now we have to find people who will come out with initial $100,000. So what we are telling people is that if they give $100,000, we will establish a bursary in their name and also give $10,000 to their money that they put $100,000. And we will ask university to match those funds, $120,000 with $120,000 to make a $240,000 endowment fund for perpetuity. not only when they give 100,000, they get tax receipt for it. So their real payment is very little, and they will have in their name $240,000. Now we have got about 75 letters out. We are negotiating almost about $3 to $4 million. I'm supposed to go on trying to get on Dragon's Den so we can get a little more publicity, how to invest 100,000 and make 220,000 in 1 minute. So that is what we are trying to do, to establish bursaries at all major universities in Canada.
Thank you. That's terrific work. And we look forward to hearing more about that in the future. And it's to the future that I want to turn in the final minutes of this discussion. We've had really rich answers, so I'm afraid we don't have time for the extra questions that we had. But I did want to conclude our discussion by forecasting the future. So to all our panelists, can you give us one statement that speaks to the heart of our panel, the heart of your perspective on our panel discussion today? So what is the future of generosity and advancing disability rights? Fran, I'll start with you.
That's a great question, Esther. Thank you. I think, every time we contribute to projects that are disability led and disability centered, we are creating opportunities for disabled people to kind of flex our power. And not in spite of our disability, but because our disability identity is actually worth investing in.
Fantastic statement. Thank you, Fran. Taylor, one statement from you.
I think Fran kind of stole a little bit of what I was going to say, but I think when you, like she had mentioned, when you invest in disability rights, it's not only investing in people who currently live with disability, but it's investing in the future of our society as a whole. It really does affect everyone, whether it be directly or indirectly. So by advancing disability rights, you are truly uplifting an entire society of people, and it's extremely important. And just one quick side note, Vim, if you do need a contact for Dragon's Den, I might be able to help with that. So I would love to connect perhaps afterwards, because I think it's really important. But you got one email, so hopefully I can get you in there.
Great connection. And Vim, final word for you.
Well, I have bullets over here. 1 in 5 persons has a disability. 5 in 5% people can help. People with disabilities have to focus on their abilities and use disabilities to their advantage. Terry Fox said, without his disability, he could not have done the Marathon of Hope. Rick Hansen used his disability to succeed by going around the world in wheelchair. To advantage disability right, we must provide equal opportunities for every one of them in Canada. And I think, again, we can and we will make Canada the best country in the world with people with disabilities.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Fran, Taylor, and Vim for being part of this panel. This has been a really great discussion. And I'd like to offer a huge thank you to our lead sponsor of the Generous Futures panel series, TD Bank Group. Your leadership has been really appreciated. Thank you as well to our promotional partners, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, Greater Toronto chapter, the Canadian Association of Gift Planners, Canada Helps, Imagine Canada, and Community Foundations of Canada. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. Please expect an email in your inbox in the next coming days with a link to the recording of this session, and please share it with your network. This has been the last in the season 2 of the Generous Futures, Power, Politics, and Charitable Giving. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you and take care.